Regarding Men, episode 53. We're all Elliot Rodger now, says MIT study.
Hey folks, Paul here with Tom and Janice as usual. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the goings on at MIT. Now, do we mean some great breakthrough in technology that we've been waiting for? Is this some new discussion of robotics that we're reaching heights in artificial intelligence that we never expected before? No, none of the above. We are going to talk about something really fundamentally stupid. And an MIT study, or something proclaiming to be an MIT study on the manosphere and the inhabitants therein. And what I can tell you in a nutshell before we dive into this discussion is, of course, the entire study hinges on the presupposition of everybody in the manosphere hates women and that we are potentially a threat to women. That's sort of, if this study has a purpose, it is to paint a threat narrative.
Yes.
About people who speak to men's issues, or about men who choose to reshape their lives in an awareness of what men's issues are and the pitfalls that come in men's lives. So all of us are threats, including Janice. Janice is not exempt. She's part of the threat narrative. We're out to get all women, and by God, MIT said so. Of course, we know MIT is the great bastion of social sciences and sociology. Wait a minute, no, it's not actually. It's a technical school, but don't let that stop you. You can do any kind of bullshit study like this that you want. But I want to throw that out there. And first, the point I guess I want to put across is one thing in their conclusions actually reeked of being accurate to me. They noted that there was a decline in activity around MRA activity and an increase in activity in MGTOW that seemed to interplay with each other, shall we say. My observance of that is that's accurate. There probably is a little less men's rights, and ultimately, because what men's rights advocates have always done, especially in the past 10 years, is point out the wisdom of taking precautions in your life. It's not been so much on changing law, legislation, political change, as it is just bringing a message to men to be able to envision themselves differently and to act differently according to a more accurate understanding of the world that they live in.
Yes.
And that would seem to me, when I hear some MGTOW say MRAs are wasting their time, I say, we're filling your ranks, you're welcome. That's what we do. But that's where the study ended up. But the main part of it that is, of course, concerning is that they're trying to create possible mass murderers, possible shooters, all things demonic about men and their unhealthy views of women. And that's the message they're trying to get across. The question is, did they do it? What do you guys think? Did they succeed?
Tom, you want to talk about the tool that was used? Because
we can do that. You know, I would consider it an epic fail, Paul. You know, I mean, it's like you can see them scrambling to try and produce this narrative that it's dangerous. These men out there are dangerous, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And but you have to look at, okay, how did they come to this conclusion? MIT. What's that called? Massachusetts Institute for Technology.
Technology, yeah.
MIT comes up with this study where they use a Google API called Perspective API to gauge whether these threads of forums are toxic or not, to see whether they're hateful or not. So they're using a computer to go through literally millions of responses to determine whether these guys might be violent. They might be somehow a problem. And some really funny stuff has come out about this, you know, because people have tested this Google API and they've come up with some interesting results. One was this forum manager said, you know, one of our top people was considered highly toxic, and we couldn't figure out why. Because he gave us money, he was there always supporting everybody and whatever. Turns out his name was Richard and his nickname was Dick, and he always used to sign the end of his post Dick. And because of that, he was considered toxic.
So we're talking about really accurate technology.
Yeah.
Here's another one. I fucking love you, man. Happy birthday.
Mhm.
93% toxic.
Uh-huh.
Garbage truck, 78% toxic. You're no racist, 77% toxic. Jews are human, 72% toxic. And on and on and on. This comment is
Wow.
highly toxic, 68% toxic. So it's like, they're taking bullshit and putting it into a meat grinder and going, oh, what wonderful steak we have. It's like, no, what you're grinding through this is complete garbage. It's garbage. Now, the forum owners did say they got it right a lot of the time. Some of the time they got it right. So it's like, yeah, maybe they got some of it right, but it's just not there yet, I don't think. And for MIT to come around and say that this is, they didn't even talk in the article about how, suspect this data is. And for them to just paint a picture of a group of people as being possibly toxic and possibly violent due to this kind of stuff is completely nuts.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, Tom, how effective would this tool be, say, if you recorded conversations that people have in psychotherapy, talking about their childhood, talking about their relationships, talking about difficulties in life? How many of those people who are seeking help and getting better, listed as, of course.
Yep, that's right. And I was thinking
MIT people did this with a straight face.
Yes. And I was thinking, Paul, I'd love to see the data for what if they went to feminist websites.
Oh, bingo.
The kinds of things they'd find would probably be at least as toxic as the MRA sites and the PUAs and the whoever's. But they didn't do that for some reason, Paul.
Well, I can't imagine why.
Yeah.
They got a narrative to paint.
Yeah, they've got a narrative. And that's the thing. That's exactly, what I was thinking as I was reading the report. And I have to admit, I did not read every word of the study upon which the report is based. So the report is called, I've lost it now. The manosphere is getting more toxic as angry men join the incels. And that in itself is really interesting. Their idea of all these MRAs and MGTOWs going to the incel group, which if anybody who knows anything about men in the men's rights advocacy or activism community know that they're not going to tend to be self-identified as incels. But anyway, so that's the report. I read the report. I did try to read some of the study. The study is called From Pickup Artist to Incel, a data-driven sketch of the manosphere. And, I had questions about the tool, and I did suspect that it was probably very crude in its ability to analyze data and come up with some kind of accurate picture of, what constitutes potentially violent language. And it raises the whole issue, exactly as you guys both just alluded to. What is the relationship between angry language, or rude language, as they also called it, and violence? Obviously, it's not a one-way street. Nobody is denying that there can be a very strong link between very angry, violent discussion, hate speech, hate propaganda, etc., and people actually being emboldened to commit acts of violence. But it's a lot more complicated than either the study or the report suggest. Right. There are a lot more factors involved. And one of the obvious things is exactly what you were just saying, Paul, that sometimes being very rude in a forum where you can be so, and using indeed hateful, angry, belligerent, toxic language can actually be incredibly purgative. It can have positive effects on one's emotional and mental health. You can come away feeling cleansed and you've got rid of the anger. And it might even be that you go to that site and you express your anger there on a regular basis, and that's just what you do. And you realize that other people feel the same thing, and it actually makes you feel a lot better and able to go on with your life. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody then, picks up a gun or joins some kind of violent group. So it's just ridiculous. And we all know the case of the mass murderer about whom everybody said, oh, that person was so quiet and well-mannered and, never said a bad thing about anybody, because that was somebody who couldn't express in any manner their sense of grievance or their sense of alienation or, the terrible things that happened to them or whatever. So, so this notion that simply because people have grievances, that necessarily means that they are going to be violent is in itself a huge question mark for me. And really, I mean, what I found about this report and the study on which it's based is that, like, it's so irresponsible, the lumping together of all these various people with their various, often very legitimate concerns, often quite responsibly expressed, all under the heading of misogyny and violence. It's just incredibly irresponsible and misleading. Even the way they described the groups was kind of ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah, and it really overlooks, and I appreciate what you just said, Janice, because it really overlooks the importance of cathartic release for people who've experienced injustice. That is, any therapist worth their salt will tell you that you need to express, that anger expressed is much more preferable to anger repressed. That you have all kinds of problems that come with stuffing anger, stuffing feelings, and it can become explosive. I mean, that is common sense. It's as basic as 2 and 2 equals 4, but they're even taking totally out of context. A lot of these men really have. Some guy hasn't seen his kid in 3 years, and he says, I hate the fucking family courts. I hate what they fucking did to my life. Man, that's healthy.
Really?
That's exactly the kind of healthy speech that we need from these guys so that they can move past and perhaps grieve their loss and move on. Mm-hmm. But this is all in a world turned upside down. This is what feminists have done with simple, basic mental health, something therapeutic and important. They turn it into a threat narrative so they can shut it down more. I think in some sick way that the ultimate objective here is to create the monsters that they claim to be so fearful of.
Well, I mean, if that is the objective, this is exactly how one would go about doing it.
Yes.
You would take people expressing legitimate grievances. You would never acknowledge that there is any legitimacy to it. And you would tell those people that they have no right to say what they're saying. They have no right to feel what they're feeling. What they're feeling actually means that they are the worst of the worst. They are people who deserve to be locked up forever. They're a danger to society. And, that their feelings are entirely without basis. And they're going to be demonized even further. They're going to be pursued and hounded. They're going to be on watch lists. They're going to be studied by, terrorism departments. And that's really helpful, isn't it?
Yes. And if you want to create violence, one easy way to do it is to tell men that their status will go up if they can attack this sort of group. And
we'll link you below.
That plays into the male hierarchy, where men are seeking status. And this kind of article, this kind of study is actually doing that. It's actually saying to men, you're gonna get more status if you attack this sort of problem.
So you mean it's emboldening men to attack other men?
Yeah, it's enticing them because it's saying you're going to get more status, and men are looking for status. I mean, naturally we are seeking status, and that's one way to do it. That's what they're doing.
I did a talk 10 years ago called "How to Build a Male Bomb," MALE.
Yeah.
That plays right into this discussion. It's exactly what I was talking about. We'll try to link it below for everyone. But this is stuff has been on the map. What they're doing has been happening to greater degrees of efficiency, because we see academia really narrowing their targets down and really getting selective about who they're going after. And they're even going after MGTOW, which is kind of incredible to me, because the most dangerous things that MGTOW say is, I'm not paying any attention to women.
Yeah.
I don't need them.
Yeah.
I'll just go my way. And that's a threat.
Exactly, Paul.
Their agenda is that as a man, you must be in our crosshairs. You must be ready as a target anytime we want to target you. And if you do something like, say, I'm living by Mike Pence rules, I'm never going to be alone with women. I live by that rule. I'm alone with my girlfriend, and that is it. I don't get alone with any other women ever.
Yep.
But for any circumstance, that would seem to me to relieve the threat.
Sure, of course it does.
I think so.
Yeah, should be celebrated and applauded. And yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing that irritated me so much about the report, which quotes directly from the study, is that every characterization of these various groups that are actually very distinct and supposedly all, linked by their misogyny, every single characterization is inaccurate. It says here that men's rights activists claim that family law and social institutions discriminate against men. Oh, please, claim that they do.
What an outrageous claim.
Oh, isn't that funny? Wonder what gave them that idea. Then it goes on, men going their own way, MGTOW, take this feeling of grievance further, arguing that society can't be amended. They often avoid women, blaming them for their problems. Well, as you say, Paul, if they're avoiding women, okay, so how do they therefore present any kind of threat? And that tag on, the authors had to add this tag on, blaming them for their problems. Anybody who knows anything about MGTOW knows that that is absolutely not true. MGTOW look at the system and say, look, we're not blaming individual women. This is about a system that makes it far too risky for a man to engage. It just makes it far too risky. And there may be many wonderful women, but the fact that there are a few exploitive women, or more than a few, but not necessarily a majority, who exploit the system that is stacked against men, means that men can lose everything. That has nothing to do with blaming individual women. These are men I'm preaching to you guys and probably to everybody else in our audience, you already know this, but it just bugs me so much how these groups with their very sophisticated and interesting and legitimate analyses are so radically misrepresented here. Because, MGTOW is about men creating lives that are not centered around women, finding ways to value themselves, finding ways to build their identities that are not dependent on the approval of women. It's a healthy thing. It's a decent philosophy. It's very interesting and radical. It has nothing to do with misogyny per se, and yet, it's just completely mischaracterized here. And it's horrible to think that this is the kind of article that somebody who knows nothing about MGTOW or men's rights advocates is going to read and say, I see, they're all blaming women. They're all horrible. They all need to be on some kind of watch list. Maybe they should be put on a no-fly list. Who knows? I mean, it's so incredibly unfair.
And if you look at the article, I think you're referring to the one, the manosphere is getting more toxic as angry men join the incels. Look at the first paragraph. Who do they talk about in the very first paragraph? Elliot
Rodger.
It's like, they're trying to connect this violence with all of these groups. It's crazy.
It's
crazy.
And what kind of threat? I mean, this nonsense that it says in the very first paragraph that their toxic misogyny fuels a hatred for women. Isn't that kind of a tautology? Anyway, that has led to several recent incidents of mass violence, several. So several makes a mass terrorism threat. And who are these several? They mention Elliot Rodger. I know that there was one other man, Chris Harper Mercer in Oregon, who I think identified himself with Elliot Rodger, if I'm remembering correctly. In Canada, we had a young fellow named Alec Manassian. I can't think of any others. There may be a number, but this is a tiny, tiny number of men who identified themselves as incels and said that was their sort of galvanizing philosophy or whatever. And it's never mentioned also, these men did not just hate women. Elliot Rodger said that he loved women, but they also killed men. I mean, they developed, these were deeply disturbed young men who developed a deep hatred for the entire world and a deep hatred for themselves. Obviously, Rodger killed himself in his rampage. Manassian tried to mimic holding a handgun so that as if he hoped that the police would kill him after his rampage in his van a couple of years ago in Toronto. To isolate this even as misogyny is completely misleading. So, I mean, it's wrong from the beginning to the end in its mischaracterizations, in its very crude and reductive equivalency between angry or rude speech and violence. It never talks about the fact that there is a hell of a lot, as both of you already suggested, a hell of a lot of very rude and angry speech that is sanctified, mainstreamed, and receives adulation from the, why can't we hate men's in the Washington Post, to the how many men must we kill before they stop raping us, from good old Mona El-Tahawi, to the end of men and are men obsolete, and everything else that we see in the mainstream, not hidden away in a dark corner of the internet. Exactly. Talk about advocating and affirming hatred and violence against men. But that's supposedly legitimate and harmless and even empowering and good. But if a man, says, I hate the fucking family courts, that gets a toxicity score of 97%. And, he should be investigated by Homeland Security as a domestic terrorist threat. It's just ridiculous. And the total lack of empathy for the legitimate grievances that are being articulated in these forums, and the total lack of any kind of, alternative perspective or any interest in addressing these problems. If this were almost any other group, I would say, except maybe white nationalists would probably be treated in a similar manner. But if this were nearly any other identifiable group that were forming these subreddit groups and having discussions about their anger and sense of alienation and despair, somebody would be brought in to say, how can this be addressed? How can the suffering of these people be in some way dealt with or responded to? What can we do to bring them into the center of society rather than push them further to the margins? Nothing like that, never. And that's always the way, because of course the grievances that are being articulated can never be legitimized in any way.
And why is it that happens like that? What's the reason for that?
I think part of it is that, first of all, there is the core belief that dissent from feminist ideology is the same thing exactly, synonymous with hatred of women. Yeah. That if you don't agree with the ideology, you must hate women. But here's the rub for me. I tell you what, and this is something I'm sure somebody can take out of context if they want to. Feminists can thank their lucky fucking stars that men are nothing like that they have been painted to be.
That's true.
Exactly.
Because if they were anything like the threat narrative that feminists paint, feminists would not be safe walking the streets.
There'd be a lot of dead feminists.
If there was anything like that. It's true. Because men are restrained and they have emotional control, and because they have some mastery to know when they can vent and let out and not need to act out violently. Yeah. It's because that's men's nature that they're able to sit there from their ivory towers and condescend to look down and paint anybody who disagrees with them as a potential murderer. I can't even imagine the hubris it takes
I know.
to come up with that kind of thinking.
It's true.
But it does.
It's true. I would add on to that, Paul, that I think that the whole moral typecasting comes into play here too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Tanya Reynolds material where
Yeah.
she basically says anybody who has agency, they're going to get less compassion. And men are demanded to strive for agency. I mean, men by our culture are pushed to strive for agency and independence at all costs. And then they're hit with this thing, well, if you have agency, no, you don't get compassion. So men are in quite a bind when it comes to crap like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of paints the idea of feminism as a misogynistic movement, in my opinion, that when you start looking at the nuts and bolts of it, and you look at how much feminism robs women of agency and how they enlist men to play out traditional values of chivalry, to protect the fair maidens. This is what they're doing. It's absolutely amazing. And if one side of the mouth comes, we have agency, we're in control, women can do anything men can do, wonderful, great, more praise to you. The other side of the mouth is the fainting couch and pearls to be clutched every time somebody's offended.
Yeah.
That's the way you get compassion.
And that is without, if women assume the agency that feminism claims on behalf of women, they wouldn't get a buck from anybody.
Reynolds said something really interesting. I haven't seen this in print, but she said it in the talk that I saw. She said that people who are very muscular, people who have, muscle-bound types, get very little compassion because of that. Isn't that interesting? It made me wonder about female bodybuilders, whether they would probably get less compassion and support than others. So there's all sorts of things we don't know that are going on here kind of beneath the sheets.
It makes sense, doesn't it, that if we perceive people are powerful, that we assume that they have the power to correct their own problems.
Yes.
But of course, men don't have the power that they're perceived. Anybody that's ever walked inside a family court on the wrong end of that system will tell you just how powerful men are.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Any man on the end of a Me Too accusation knows just how powerful men are to defend themselves against the rumor mill and the accusations that come his way. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's fascinating that we don't see women issuing a Me Too accusation as powerful.
Yeah, no, it's they're so brave.
That's right.
They're so to come forward amidst the mob of other accusers. So brave.
Women are seen as having what Tanya Reynolds calls patiency, which means they're more likely to be the victim. Therefore, when they do something, it's a call to action.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so brave. They're so wonderful.
Yeah.
Belford Bax wrote over 100 years ago about the
God bless him.
Phony courage of going with the mob.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is, and he was describing the same thing we're dealing with right now, over 100 years later.
It's a great way to put it, the phony courage of
Yeah.
going with the mob. That kind of sums it up.
And that's what I see every time I see particularly male feminists or white guys out there with the chest puffed out.
Yes.
How dare you unhand that fair maiden?
That's true.
Dude. Sorry.
Oh, boy.
But 1952 called and they want their attitude back.
And interestingly enough, there's now this movement to also demonize what they call trad wives. I just heard about this phenomenon, which I guess is trending in Great Britain. And all of a sudden, there's a number of studies and articles about trad wives. And of course, as the title suggests, these are women who want to live traditional lives. They want to stay at home, be moms, bake cookies, look after their kids, do all that kind of thing. They are now being seen as, there's an article in I think the London Times, if I'm remembering correctly, that compares them to ISIS brides.
Oh,
and
God.
Actually, and talks about how they have been, quote, radicalized So that's really interesting that tradition is now seen as radical. And so they themselves are now being given very little empathy or sympathy and are seen as a threat as well, because it seems they love men and want to live lives in which they, to some extent, devote themselves to their husbands and families. And, you know, I know there's a lot of our... What's that?
God forbid.
God forbid. Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of guys in our audience who aren't interested in traditionalism, seeing it as a trap for men too. But
and I'll see trad wives in a negative light too, because for some of these guys, the attitude is it's only a matter of time. She's going to take him to the cleaners.
Right.
So they're getting it from both sides.
And they're right in a way.
Yeah, I mean, she could, of course, and some men cynically will say, well, she just wants to leech off a man's, you know, work while she sits at home and has a nice time. But anyway, I mean, you know, that's a whole other discussion, of course. But I think it's interesting that these women who actually do want to inhabit a fairly traditional kind of space of nurturing and caring and looking after the home and you know, presumably celebrating their husbands and supporting them and loving them and all of those things, at least, you know, in that's the mythology, that's their ideal, that they are now being given almost no sympathy whatsoever and are also being demonized because they're a threat to the feminist narrative. So they're all anything that
to destroy the family.
Exactly. Anything that strives to bolster the family and that expresses love for it and has it as an ideal is a threat to the feminists and has
people
to be
who think that's insane, you really need to get down with your studying on the history of this. It has been the feminist agenda to destroy the nuclear family
quite explicitly
for quite some time now, openly stated, not hiding it. It's there.
Right.
They see it as an institution of slavery for women, and the only way to overcome that slavery is to destroy the family.
Yep.
Soviet feminist Alexandra Kollontai, who advocated free love and was an inspiration to many feminists in North America in the early 20th century, you know, or you can look at Kate Millett in the late 1960s. Really. It's been very explicitly stated from the beginning.
It's a really interesting exercise to try and say that to someone. Say, you know, the goal of feminism has been to destroy the family. People get so upset, you know, they get so jacked up when you say that. It's like I've told a number of people that, and it's fascinating to try and do and just see what happens, you know.
That's bullshit. That's crazy. Feminism is about equality.
Just read their words.
Exactly.
And if you really want to know the agenda here, in my opinion, and I'll put on my foil hat for a moment, is that if you want to control a society,
right,
disempower men,
and
remove any stake they have in the family, and give women a false sense of empowerment, as long as they're dependent on the state.
The state.
You do that, and you can control a society completely.
There's one more thing, Paul.
What's that?
Take away their guns.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Hear that, Virginia?
Destroy Vince Tower.
Yes, Virginia, they really are trying to take away the guns.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But that's another discussion.
That's another discussion too. Yeah. So, I guess we should wind this one up.
Probably.
Okay, just a little note here at the end, a couple of little notes. There's so many putas in the world. We're not going to do one every week. When one of them stands out, we're going to be on top of it. I guess we can hand the puta to MIT.
I would think so.
To the whole institution for allowing this study to happen. It deserves the puta. And for the humanitarian award, I'll nominate Tom and Jan. We'll call it a day.
Well, thank you very much.
Very good.
The other thing is we want to talk a little bit, just a minute here, about upcoming activities on the Regarding Men website.
Yeah.
And Tom has been just up to his eyebrows in working on that so that we can have a social media platform for red pill people, away from prying eyes, and an opportunity for red pill people to connect with each other.
Exactly.
Tom, you want to fill us in a little more on the
I think you
details?
just said it all, Paul. You know, that's what we want. We want a community of red pill people because we see the power of isolation. You know, anytime you take the red pill, you're going to be isolated. You're going to lose people from your family. You're going to lose people from your community. You're going to lose people at work, every place. And so you get this isolation that's just devastating sometimes. And we really need to have places where people can connect with others who are going through the same kind of thing. That's what it's all about. So we're going to have all kinds of ways to help people connect, including Zoom, video to help people connect, and we'll see where we go. So keep your ears
Keep your
open.
radar tuned in.
Yeah, hopefully in the next month or two we'll have we'll get it going. But we're testing it now, and we'll see how it works.
And I think we can say for sure, contra the study and the reports based on the study, this is not about violence. It's not about rudeness even. This is about people connecting and talking about where they are and where they want to get to and how they can do that and leading fulfilled lives.
Yep. Amen.
Amen. There will be more details on this in the future. We're just sort of gearing you up to expect more, and you can expect more. We'll be doing a lot more with this in the days ahead.
We will be.
It's a great site, Tom. You've done incredible work.
Yes.
Well, we've all worked together on it.
No, you've done the lion's share. I haven't done anything. I haven't even made my profile yet.
We'll see if it works.
I will.
We sort of pride ourselves on calling bullshit around here, Tom.
Okay, I'll shut the fuck up.
Tom has been working on this.
He has
Yes,
been.
he has.
And for good reason and for good cause, I think, you know.
Anyway, you guys have a great day.
Have a great day. Okay.
That's good. Take care. We'll see
care.
you then.
Bye-bye.
Or?
Good.
All right. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Well, I did that in one take.
I got it good.